Hello and welcome. In this video, I wanted to take a look at an interesting Sisters of Battle list that utilized a bit of a different build than we normally see within tournament play. And as always, remember, just because this is a tournament list does not mean it can't be fun in a casual setting as well. Anyway, with that being said, let's take a look at how this list performed. This list placed first place out of 22 players, played by a player named Kian Tan in the Grex Tides of Chaos Grand Tournament. This Grand Tournament was held on September 24th, 2022 in Singapore. And now that we know how it did, let's take a look at the list itself. This list begins with a battalion detachment composed of the Order of the Valorous Heart, and the Order of the Valorous Heart is one of the more popular Sisters orders that we do see within different competitive lists. And while I covered the orders in their own video, which you can check in the link down below in the description, I will give a quick rundown of the universal benefits that the Valorous Heart has to offer. The first of those benefits is unchanged, being A5 plus feel no pain against mortal wounds, and within the current environment, considering how many psychic armies there are, and considering how many mortal wounds are flying around nowadays, this ability is actually rather strong and can save your sister units rather effectively in many circumstances. It's not the most powerful defensive ability that you can have, but it's definitely a nice one to pick up, and one that can serve you rather well in many situations. Especially if you don't really need the offensive capabilities of the Order of the Bloody Rose, the mobility of the Ardent Shroud, or the various benefits of the Martyred Lady, which are all orders that do see a decent amount of play. The second benefit is the one that has changed, as prior to this it reduced the AP of weapons targeting them. However, now with the introduction of Armor of Contempt, the second universal benefit of this order didn't really make any sense as it conflicted with the Armor of Contempt changes, and as a result it was changed to say that enemy attacks cannot reroll the wound roll against units with this order. Not the worst defensive capability, and a lot of armies do make use of wound reroll abilities, so this will come into play in many situations and can increase your durability even further. I do think the Order of the Valorous Heart works especially well with armies such as this, which do need a little more survivability due to the structure of the list, whereas other armies may benefit more from the Bloody Rose simply because of their inclusion of certain units. Anyway, with that said, let's take a look at the list itself. The battalion detachment begins with an HQ choice, as all battalion detachments do. The first of these HQ choices is Morven Val, and Morven Val is an incredibly powerful unit that sees play within the majority of different Sisters lists, as she has a very impressive durability with a high melee output and a very solid range output, in addition to just being a fantastic character as a whole. I really do like the design of Morven Val, as she's very deceptive in that you look at her and you know she's going to be strong, but then when you actually play her, you realize just how strong she is, as all of her abilities kind of stack up to make her a very impressive force and make her really unique in the way she plays at a very reasonable points cost. I will also say this Morven Val in this situation has been given a Warlord trait, being the trait that she must take, which is Righteous Rage. And Righteous Rage says that the unit with this trait can reroll the hit and wound roll within melee combat, so that's definitely a good perk to have, considering how powerful Morven Val can be within melee. Anyway, with that being said, we move on to the second HQ choice for this battalion detachment. The second HQ choice is an interesting one that does see some play, but it's not necessarily the most standard. This HQ choice being the combination of Ephrael Stern and Keganal of the Bloody Tears. This is an interesting HQ choice that has reasonable durability and a solid output in terms of mortal wounds. It's also better against Chaos, which are very popular in the meta currently due to their abilities such as Bolts of Judgment and Daemon Fuge. These two abilities can definitely give you a little bit more benefit against those Chaos forces, and we'll see that this list really did try to take advantage of its ability to fight Chaos, as a specific battle list can really have a lot of different benefits against a Chaos army, and that's always a nice thing to have, considering how much of the field is made up by Chaos. And I will say that one thing that's very nice about the Sisters is you have all these different amazing HQ choices, with Morven Val being kind of the standout, and then you kind of have your pick between Ephrael Stern, Celestine, Juna Theorita, the regular Canoness, and even in some cases, some of the other HQ choices. All in all, I will say that even with so many powerful HQ choices, there's still that selection to be made, and a lot of optionality that does allow you to have some fun with how you choose your different HQ choices. And I will say you should never discount Ephrael Stern and Keganal, as it can definitely perform rather well within an army, as we see here, even in place of another powerful HQ choice, such as Celestine herself. Now with the HQ choices covered, we can move on to the troop choices. This battalion detachment has gone rather light on the different troop choices, deciding to go with 3 minimal units of 5 Sisters of Battle each, with no upgrades. This is definitely a very minimalistic choice in terms of troop choices that the Sisters can bring to a table, and it's one that's rather intentional, as you'll see very soon. This list employs a different style of play than your traditional assisted battle army. I will say that with these kind of small units, it's very nice to be part of the Order of the Valorous Heart, as you can really give them that little bit of extra durability that allows them to survive while holding objectives or performing actions. And because of the way this list is built, you're really going to want a way to make your units go as far as possible due to kind of some of the limitations that you'll experience playing this kind of army. Anyway, with that being said, let's move on to the lead choices of this list. The lead choices for this battalion begin with the all too popular Dogmata. The Dogmata in this case has been given a relic, which is a Valorous Heart only relic, known as the Casket of Penance. The Casket of Penance gives the character bearing it an aura that reads, enemies within 3 inches get -1 toughness, and if they're chaos, they get an additional -1 to their strength. And this isn't the only anti-chaos attack that this Dogmata has. As for the War of Him that the Dogmata knows, she has been given the refrain of Blazing Piety. And the refrain of Blazing Piety says, when it is successfully intoned, it deals D3 mortal wounds to an enemy within 12 inches, or if the enemy being targeted is a chaos enemy, that enemy unit suffers 3 mortal wounds instead. And this all shows that this list is very adept at dealing with chaos, so sometimes you have to make the meta call if you expect a lot of chaos within your meta, or if you expect to have very little of it, though in either case, both these abilities are perfectly fine against non-chaos units as well, and I should mention that Ephrael Stern is still a perfectly fine choice even if you're not playing against chaos armies. It's just that all of these things do that little bit of extra work when you're playing against chaos armies. The second lead choice is a bit of a different unit than we normally see, that being a Preacher in this case. The Preacher is a super cheap unit coming in at only 25 points, but he does have a lot less benefits than the Dogmata does, who does cost 65 points total. I will say, in most cases you're probably not going to see a Preacher in the list, as he doesn't really bring as much to the table as something like the Dogmata or other Sisters of Battle special characters that can be found within an elite slot. However, if you're looking for a cheap elite choice that can bring some more hymns and carry some more gear, he's definitely one of the cheapest and easiest to include units. And don't forget, the Preacher does have some anti-chaos tech, in this case being a rather weak one, which is a leadership aura that says enemy chaos units within 6 inches gain -1 to leadership. Not the most impressive thing in the world, but you can definitely make it stack up if you have other abilities such as this, and it's always a nice benefit to just have considering how cheap this model is, and it's pretty much a free ability, which is always nice. Anyway, this Preacher has also been given a relic, which is the Sigil of the Ecclesiasticus. The Sigil is a very popular relic, usually seen on the Dogmata herself. However, as the Dogmata already has a relic, this one had to be attributed to a different unit. The Sigil says that the bearer of this relic knows an additional hymn of battle and can intone an additional hymn every single turn. Unfortunately, this list did not specify what the additional hymn was, so we have to kind of make some assumptions. However, the Preacher is limited to a number of hymns he can know, as opposed to something like the Dogmata, which can pick from any of the 6. The Preacher can only pick from the first 3. And in this situation, one hymn was attributed, being the Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude. The Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude says that when successfully intoned, a unit within 6 inches cannot be affected by enemy psychic powers, and all enemy psychic power debuffs are nullified on that unit. This is a rather popular hymn, considering how popular psychic armies currently are of different varieties. However, I do want to mention something for this list in specific, and that is that the Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude can be used on Engines of Redemption and is not just limited to the Adepta Sororitas units in specific. This will be more relevant as we see more of this list pan out. With these 2 characters covered, we move on to the last 3 elite choices of this army list, in this case being 3 units of 3 Paragon Warsuits, with all of those units being upgraded to have 3 multi-meltas each. And I do think the Paragon Warsuits have definitely been a real winner of the different changes in 9th edition, as they started out their life as being a rather mediocre unit that saw some very minimal fringe play. However, now with all the changes that they've experienced, such as a reduction in points and the addition of Armor of Contempt, they've definitely become a lot better, and we definitely see them within a lot more lists than we did previously. In this case, this list has maximized the number of Paragon Warsuits that it brings, as they're a very durable monster unit that does give you that multi-melta output that you would normally see on Retributors. However, this list does not include any Retributors, as the Paragons serve as a perfectly fine replacement for those Retributor units. I'll say this, I definitely like the Paragon suits a lot more now, considering how much better they become, as they're a rather nice unit that can be very durable and can put out quite a heavy amount of damage so they're definitely something that gives you that kind of power unit that's both durable and has very high output that I really enjoy the playstyle of, so that's something that I personally enjoy as someone who enjoys mid-range style of play. However, I can understand why people would opt for other units that are more of a glass cannon if they're more of an aggressive style player, or opt for other types of units if they want to be more of a control player or something of that nature. Though if you want the best of both worlds, I definitely suggest you look into the Paragon Warsuits, as they give you that ability to kind of play as a durable army against certain forces, and kind of an aggressive army against other forces, depending on what kind of opponent you're up against, and that's always a good type of flexibility to have. With the elite choices covered, we go on to look at the heavy choices for this army list. This army list has included 3 different heavy support choices, the first of those heavy support choices being a Castigator tank. The Castigator was something that wasn't particularly appreciated when it first came out, though it has since seen a points drop, going from 160 points to 135 points. That's definitely much cheaper and makes it much easier to include. I will also say that not everyone overlooked the Castigator, as some prominent Sisters of Battle players, such as the hosts of the Sisters Act podcast, definitely saw that the Castigator had potential, and they were more accepting to its inclusion within Sisters of Battle army lists, as it does have the longest range weapon within the Sisters forces if you choose to arm it with a battle cannon that gives it a 72-inch range and a rather reasonable profile, something that the Sisters forces normally lack, and as such we do see Castigators included occasionally within different Sisters armies, just to give them that ability to have that little bit more of extended board coverage, thanks to the long range and solid output that the Castigator has. However, in this situation, this list has gone with a little bit of a different choice, having the Castigator armed with its standard 3 heavy bolters, in addition to its Castigator autocannons. The Castigator autocannons have a shorter range at only 48 inches, with a shot profile of 4 D3 heavy shots at a strength of 7, 1 armor penetration, and D2 damage. Essentially, they function as a bit of a heavy bolter profile, and the reason you would include something like this within a list such as this is pretty apparent when we see the next 2 heavy support choices. That being 2 units of 4 mortifiers each of those units including an Anchorite Sarcophagus, which brings up a single model's armor save up to 3+ for a cost of 5 points, and all of those mortifiers are armed with 2 heavy flamers, as well as 2 mortifiers in each squad having penitent flails, and 2 mortifiers having buzzblades. As such, as you can see within this list, between those Paragon Warsuits and the mortifiers having the heavy flamers, this list does not particularly have a lot of mid-range firepower, so the Castigator definitely brings that mid-range firepower in a large enough quantity to really help out this list take out certain units that it needs to take out at a decent enough range. So the Castigator does fill a very specific role within this list, as do some of the other choices, as you have those units of Paragons and Mortifiers to kind of be a monster list, as opposed to being a more standard Sisters army, which doesn't necessarily need the inclusion of that mid-range firepower due to them having plenty of it on their other units. Though in this case, because of the minimalistic units of more generic troops and the larger units of monster units that want to be within close range and want to brawl within melee combat, whether that's more of involve the Paragon Warsuits or the Mortifiers, it definitely benefits from the inclusion of that Castigator with those autocannons and heavy bolters. In any case, let's take a quick look at what the Mortifiers have to offer in terms of stat profile and output profile. The Mortifiers have a rather quick movement speed at 8 inches, with a decent enough toughness of 5, a 4+ normal save being upgraded to 3+ for any model with a sarcophagus, and a 5+ feel no pain save that really makes them that much more durable. They also have 5 wounds each and benefit from the Armor of Contempt. And with those heavy flamers, they have a threat range of 12 inches, and with heavy D6 shots that automatically hit on each of those flamers, that means with 8 heavy flamers in a unit with an average of 3.5 shots per flamer, you get a total of 28 shots on average, at a strength of 6, 1 armor penetration, and 1 damage, that automatically hits and is equipped on a vehicle so that it could be fired within close combat as well. That's quite a lot of output on what's quite a durable unit and can be incredibly devastating to any swarm units as well as even mid-range and heavy units just because of the sheer volume that each of those mortifier units gives you. Now that's not all the mortifiers have to offer, as they're even more impressive within melee combat than they are with that shooting profile. Consider that the mortifiers have the Zealot ability, which allows them to roll hit rolls when charged or being charged or performing a heroic intervention, and they also have the Anguish of the Unredeemed ability, which allows them to fight one last time after being destroyed within melee combat if you roll a 4+ on a d6 to enable this ability when the model is destroyed. Now what do the armaments for this mortifier unit give them in terms of a melee profile? Well, they begin with a 3+ weapon skill, and every mortifier that has a pair of buzzblades, which is 2 per unit, will have 5 attacks at a strength of 8, 4 armor penetration, and 2 damage. In addition to that, every mortifier with the double flails will have 10 attacks at a strength of 5, 2 armor penetration, and 1 damage. Both profiles are pretty decent, though they do serve different roles. This means that a unit has 30 attacks total, 10 of which using the Buzzblade profile, and 20 of which using the Flail profile. This is definitely something that can do quite a ton of damage to anything within melee, regardless of the unit type, and due to the mix of the different weapons within the units, neither unit is necessarily weak to any kind of specific enemy, and as mortifier models are destroyed within the unit, you can remove the ones you think are least optimal for the situation in question, depending on what they're armed with, considering you want the Penitent Flails against more Swarm type units, while you want the Buzzblades against more Elite style units. This gives you a lot of flexibility on an already flexible unit, and the Mortifiers are definitely a unit I really like, as they're just a very interesting monster unit that can do a ton of work within a game. All in all, I really like the style of list, as one reason I haven't really covered the sisters too much on this channel isn't because they're necessarily boring, but I find that their units are generally cheap enough in point value that a lot of their lists kind of feel a little bit samey, not because they are the same, but because it's very easy for them to include pretty much everything they want within a list, which is great for a player because you can get those Retributors, Repentia, Novitiates, and even Seraphims and Zephyrims within a list alongside your choice of different HQ choices, and in different quantities depending on how you want to play your list, and that's really fun for playing the list on the battlefield, but analyzing the list kind of leaves you feeling sometimes that you might be looking at kind of the same list with a few minor modifications in comparison to a list such as this, which really takes a different approach to how you build this as a battle, showing that there's a lot of depth to the army by building a very monster style list that we haven't really seen since the new chapter approved came out. Although in prior editions this kind of list was very popular, and this does go to show that this list is by no means out of the meta, however it's a bit of a different playstyle than a lot of players get into Sisters for, so I do understand why it's not necessarily super prevalent. I do also think as a result, Sisters have a lot of options, but the one thing that they do kind of lack is they don't have any Titanic units unless they want to bring in Allied Knights, and they don't necessarily have as many elite units as other armies do, considering that the Paragon Warsuits are kind of their primary elite unit. This means that they're a little more limited in terms of what kind of playstyles they can have, as right now they kind of have that Swarm style build where you bring all those infantry style units, and they kind of have this kind of build which is a bit more of a monster list, but they don't really have a tank build unless you consider this to be that tank build, and that's okay, but they also don't have kind of a Titan build, whereas something like Necrons can have all those different builds, and that definitely makes Necrons and Chaos kind of a little more unique, but the amount of variety that the Sisters have is definitely enough to make them very interesting and very intriguing compared to a lot of other armies out there. So I definitely think if you're looking for a unique army, and you're kind of a new player starting out a different army, the Sisters of Battle are definitely a good choice if you like these kind of lists. Now with that being said, if you are a Sisters of Battle player, do you enjoy the infantry style build more, or do you prefer this kind of monster style build instead? And if you're someone who would be starting out Sisters now, the same question goes to you as well. Do let me know in the comments down below what kind of Adepta Sororitas list you prefer, and if there's a style of list that you would like to see in the future added to the model line that the Sisters of Battle has access to, as I think one thing they lost going into 9th edition is the kind of build that brought something like 3 Exorcist tanks, despite having more tanks than ever. Anyways, as always, thank you for watching, and as always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons. You guys are really awesome people and really do help support the channel. In addition to that, I would like to say, if you know anyone who may benefit from this content, please do share this video with them, as it not only helps the channel, but it also helps them out as well. And if you've enjoyed the content, do subscribe and like for future videos from this channel. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.